vocals. Arguably the most important thing in any mix, and the toughest to get right. For years, my vocals just wouldn't come out the way I hear them on records that I loved. So a little like Alice through the looking glass, I stepped through the door of mixing vocal secrets the pros use. And after falling through endless amounts of tricks the pros have up their sleeves, I landed on a few that changed my vocal mixes overnight. And in this video, not only will you know what these tricks are, but you'll know the one that was a complete game changer that I had overlooked for years, and you've probably overlooked as well. First trick on this list that I stole from Chad Blake, who has worked with artists like Switchfoot all the way to U2. Chad keeps his profile on the low in the industry, but his results are anything but that. And this trick that Chad pulled out really helped with one of the biggest nightmare issues I dread whenever I'm sent a project. There isn't any worse feeling than importing the files for a mix, going to check out the vocal, and you discover the one thing that can make you sweat in your chair faster than the Roadrunner from Looney Tunes. The dreaded thin vocal. Could have been the mic, could have been the engineer used too much EQ on the way in, but now you've got a thin vocal, and naturally the first thought is to boost the low end, right? But that just brings up the noise floor along with it. I mean, you can't boost something that isn't there. So when I saw in a video Chad was using a plugin that I'd only seen other mixers use on drums, well, up until that point, my fear of thin vocals immediately went away. It's a simple yet creative way to help bring more chest quality to a thin vocal. Chad was using Devil Lock on thin sounding vocals to give them more distortion and saturation so the harmonics would create a pleasing full chest like quality to that vocal. Keep the crush at 0, with the crunch in the darkness at around 3, with a fast release, and dial the mix to taste. But we're not done with Devil Lock just yet. After seeing Chad use Devil Lock in this way, it seemed like all of a sudden I was seeing it being used in other creative ways by other mixers. Kinda like when you get a new car and all of a sudden every car on the road looks like yours.
Right, stop.
And it should come as no surprise that Eric Valentine, the mixer who gave us Queens of the Stone Age Songs for the Deaf and Taking Back Sunny's Louder Now, would have some cool tricks for Devil Lock on vocals himself. A few years back, Papa Valentine was doing a mix breakdown of Keith Urban's Horses, and in this video mentioned how he loved using Devil Lock to get the vocal up front and aggressive in a mix. To do this, start with the crush at about 0.5 with no crunch or darkness, and then the release set to fast, and again, dial that mix knob to taste. These tricks have really come in handy with some wimpy sounding screams that needed to sound more like Godzilla fighting King Kong. The next trick is from Greg Wells, who's worked with artists like 21 Pilots and All American Rejects. In an interview, Greg mentioned one of his favorite tricks to do with saturation plugins mimics a workflow many engineers will do with outboard gear while tracking, where the engineer will push the preamp a little bit more in certain parts to get a hair more harmonic distortion, vibe, and character. Greg replicates this technique with a modern approach that allows for more flexibility without the fear of possibly distorting the performance while tracking. Greg likes to automate the amount of drive he is using on the saturation plugins on a vocal for certain parts, like a pre-chorus, a chorus, even a bridge, so that the vocal gets a little bit more angsty like a rebellious teenager.
You're gonna have to kill me!
But in a less dramatic and desirable way. I mentioned earlier the dread of finding out a vocal performance is a little thin sounding when you're reviewing the session, but that isn't always the case, and after you check the vocals to see if any more tuning or time alignment needs to be done, it's off to the races and you get to mixing. So you start throwing some EQs and compressors on the vocals, maybe some delays and reverbs, and as the mix progresses, you start to notice something that is happening to those vocals in your mix. All of a sudden the vocals need a lot of automation, even with the compression, and your compressor might be working overtime and just ready to quit. Before you know it, the vocals aren't working in the mix, you've added another limiter and maybe some EQ and who knows what else, and your vocal mix is just This would happen to me like a lot. Like a lot.
You serious?
Luckily, this all changed for me after I watched an interview where Chris Lord-Alge gave a great piece of advice.
The first thing I learned is that listen to the boss, and it's all about discipline and you know nothing.
No, this advice.
It doesn't matter. I can filter delays and harmonies and shit till the sun goes down, whatever.
Okay.
Well, it doesn't sound like a Neve. It doesn't sound like an API. Well, you know what? Go yourself.
CLA seems to have some strong feelings about that. Alright, in all seriousness, CLA's little trick was, well, a few tricks that create a finishing fatality vocal combo like if it was Mortal Kombat. So if you know CLA, you know he loves his analog gear on vocals for its character and flavor. And a staple of CLA's vocal workflow is CLA pushing to channels 8K on his SSL 4000E series console that goes into one of his Blue Stripe 76s, which I'm sure almost everyone and their moms know by now.
Well, duh.
But there is something before all of this that CLA does to ensure that he isn't fighting the vocal in a mix once it hits his chain. And I swear it's gonna change your vocal mixes faster than getting a pizza delivery from Spider-Man.
Pizza time.
A key to CLA being able to use the EQ and compressor for its character to cut through a mix is CLA takes the time to check every vocal line sung by the vocalist is living in the same range, so that any given vocal won't push any of the signal chain past its desired threshold. This creates consistency in the performance pre-compressor, so he can get more character, color, and attitude from the compressor. When this isn't done, it leads to overly squashed and sometimes a distorted vocal compression sound, and a bunch of overmixing trying to correct all of this. The way CLA adjusts the vocal performance pre-processing is by normalizing the audio or using clip gain on the vocals. But this is just one of 3 parts to this process. The second thing CLA does is find all the breaths in the performance and manually adjust the gain on these parts anywhere between -9 or -12 to where the level was set for the normalization or clip gain of the vocal performance. This way the breaths still sound natural with the compressor and the rest of the performance. Alright, and come close for this third one, because this one can also help on things other than vocals in your mix. The third little thing CLA will do to help if a vocal is a little too pokey, like that porcupine in your backyard, is using an instance of L1 before the SSL console EQ to tame the peaks before they hit that 8K boost on the console, creating a smoother top end before the compressor. Can you feel that? That's your vocal mixing stonks going up. Now this next trick from Dave Pensado is a staple of his mixing. Dave uses this trick to help with a problem I think every mixer shares. When mixing a vocal, once we start adding the goodies like delay and reverbs to create interesting and catchy vocal spaces, something happens that causes us to go back, automate vocals, or use limiters to get the vocal up front again. But sometimes, no matter how much automation or limiting we do, the vocal will still get lost. And Dave's trick helps to eliminate this issue and get that vocal right up in front and center where it belongs. Using a stereo parallel bus on the vocal that has an 1176, which helps push the vocal up. Set the input and output to about 24 with the medium tack, fast release, and a 4:1 ratio. Then throw an L1 after the 1176 so it shaves off the peaks and keeps the vocal level. This parallel bus has become a staple in my own production, and it gives you that coveted pro vocal sound. They'll have your artists and their fans kneeling at your mixing awesomeness.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
These are really great tricks to have in your mixing toolkit, but aren't enough by themselves to give you the mixes to set you apart from the competition. Which is why you'll want to watch this video right here for some more tricks pro mixers have up their sleeves that you'll want to use in your own mixes.